going on, everybody? Andarki namaskaram. Welcome to another episode of Masalainurdosa Presents. I have a really special interview today. A topic that is something that I've been thinking about for quite some time, and something that I've been wanting to learn about for quite some time. And and it's about cultural appropriation, yoga, cooking, and our guest, Divya Balakrishnan, I'm really excited to have today. I first heard about Divya and got introduced to Divya through a pretty awesome Instagram page called ABCD Yogi, and basically the concept of this Instagram account is to basically debunk any myths of yoga and stop harm through meaningless appropriation and colonization and spiritual bypassing. At least that's their sort of mission statement, if you will. And I saw Divya do like an Instagram takeover, and she practices a really interesting form of yoga called Kallaripayattu, and it's originates from Kerala. And we've traditionally, if anybody's heard of Kalari, it's typically heard in the concept of it being a martial arts. But Divya had brought this new aspect of it, that it's actually yoga, and I connected with her, and I'm using this as an opportunity to learn about her perspective, and maybe a little bit about what is happening with yoga in this day and age in America. So I'm really excited to have her on board. Let me just add her to the live real quick. Once again, welcome to Masalainurdosa Presents, and today's here we are. Our guest today, Divya Balakrishnan. Divya, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Absolutely. I have so much to ask you and so much to learn from you today. I really am curious because, I think in our initial conversation, I told you that, I've always kind of grew up around a family that is really into yoga, but for me, I'm not like super into it, but I'm having some strong feelings. I would love to hear about your perspective and maybe learn a little bit more about how I can unpack and some of those feelings. But anyways, Divya Balakrishnan, she is, you know what? I posted her little bio, but let me ask you, Divya, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everyone. My name is Divya. I live in the Bay Area of California, but I am originally from the East Coast. I was born and raised there. I lived in India for a little bit when I was about 8 years old, which was a really interesting experience. My family migrated here from Tamil Nadu in, I think, the 80s. Mm-hmm. And it was so important for my family to keep our culture alive within me and my sister. So I grew up with a very cross-cultural background, doing a lot of very Indian activities. So yeah, singing Carnatic music, going to the temple, having family, visiting family. I learned Tamil at a very young age and taught myself to read and write in it as well, just because I wanted to feel more connected to my roots. So yeah, being connected to my roots has always been a really important thing to me. And mm-hmm. After living in India, it was a crazy experience for me, just being so fully immersed in my culture. Although I was so young, I don't think I could fully see how amazing that experience was until I was much older, and I was able to reflect on it and think, wow, I'm so lucky to have had this opportunity to have been exposed to so many different cultures. And so then from India, we moved to California, which is where we've been settled for the last really long time, longer than I've lived anywhere else. So I've been out here. And more about me, I'm an artist. I've been a visual artist my whole life. Mm-hmm. And for the last 10 to 12 years, I've been making work that's centered around socioeconomic or racial issues, racial inequality, materialism, and even concepts like neo-colonialism which
Yeah.
is, something we see often. Yoga, Western yoga is a perfect example of neocolonialism.
Hmm.
And yeah, these are topics that I love to create artworks about. And I've also been practicing yoga for my whole life. Well, not my whole life, since I was 12, so for quite a while.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to fight past imposter syndrome, which I'll speak on a bit because, growing up in the States, you don't see a lot of South Asian people leading in the yoga industry. So it's not very
Yeah.
encouraging for you to like develop that confidence to go out and do it. So it took me a while, but I recently got my yoga teaching license,
Yeah.
and I'm very excited about where that's going to take me next.
That's awesome. I mean, you kind of segued into the next question. Tell us a little bit about the yoga that you practice and how your relationship with it and how it's grown. Yeah.
So when I first started doing yoga, it was introduced to me by my mom, who had on one of our visits to India, just gone to some local community college and taken a couple of weekend classes, just in the basics, Surya Namaskar, which really, in its essence, yoga really is about the basics. It's about discipline and the mind-body connection. I mean, now it has kind of evolved into some very complex, very um, kind of glamorized thing where it's all about shapes and poses and flows and sequence, but it really is a simple practice in its nature.
Hmm.
But she taught that to me, and it was at a point in my life when I was struggling with a lot of self-image and a lot of body image issues. So
Hmm.
learning yoga at this young age was my first opportunity to see what my body could do, that I was worth something because I was able to create that power for myself. I was able to do something.
Yeah.
And I was starting to shed these layers of judgment that I had about myself, which it really, when you're young and you hear a lot of things about your body or your skin color, all these different factors, it can really start to ingrain inside your mindset and how you view yourself.
Yeah.
And practicing yoga just started to build that confidence in me, help kind of shed away these layers. And from there, I continued practicing through my college years. And that was actually the first time I ever took any yoga class. Before that, it was always just me practicing on my own,
Yeah.
using some like old BKS Iyengar books that my mom had that I would just kind of watch and read and try to do them. Um, but yeah, my first formal classes were in college, and it was taught by a white woman, and she was great. But it was interesting because I still started to understand that, I feel like an outsider in this space, in this practice
Mm.
that is native to our culture. But I did start to push my athletic abilities a little bit and continue honing that self-confidence. So I
Yeah.
was able to start kind of getting competitive with myself and do these challenging inversions and things. And um, from there, kind of post-collegiate years, my entire view of yoga just kind of turned on its head.
Yeah.
I started going through growing pains, as we all do, as we start to get older and
Yeah.
have more life experiences.
Hmm.
And I started to see that yoga is a tool. It's a tool that we can wield to heal ourselves and really get into those psychosomatic layers of our psyche and our body, as well as my yoga teacher who trained me often said, we got issues in our tissues, and it's
Hmm.
so true. We
Yeah.
store trauma in our body, and yoga was an excellent way for me to kind of work through negative emotions that I was going through and come out stronger on the other side.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, tell us a little bit about the type of yoga that you actually practice. Kalaripait, I was like mentioning earlier, that's typically, from what I knew and understood, it was a martial arts originating from Kerala. How did you get introduced to that? I don't think I've met another Kalari yogi, if that's a term per se.
Yeah, so I mean, initially I hadn't even heard of Kalari Bite until maybe 5 years ago. I saw this really interesting video that was kind of going semi-viral online of this elder Indian woman in a sari in this like kind of like
Yes.
dungeon-looking mud hut. She was wielding the sword and like
Yeah,
schooling some
yeah,
young kid, and I was like,
yeah,
I want to be her when I grow up.
yeah.
So I looked into the practice and I was absolutely blown away. It was beautiful. It is a martial art, and it shares roots with yoga. So it's almost like there's
Yeah.
two sides to this practice, and they're all just different pathways for us to explore to attain dharma or purpose, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Um, and Kalaripayat, like I mentioned, it is a martial art, it's a fighting art, a combative art, but it's also an internal reflective practice. And there
Mm-hmm.
is an arm of Kalaripayat that is about yoga. So Kalaripayat fighters, they will do Kalari yoga early in the morning. So fun fact, this spring I was actually booked to go train at an ashram in Kerala
Mm-hmm.
for a while, and I was, COVID happened, but
Yeah.
the schedule that we were kind of laid out for our training, right? It was 5 a.m. wake up call. We'd have to do this procedure where you oil up your body and sort of lubricate your muscles, and 5:30 you go to Kalari yoga practice, which is about
Mm-hmm.
30 to 45 minutes, and it's very similar to what we know as vinyasa yoga now. So it's kind of movements that are meant to create flow and heat in the body to start loosening you up and preparing you for a more intensive practice. So
Mm.
Kalari yoga is often practiced in preparation for a Kalaripayat session, which is typically 2 to 3 hours.
Mm.
Um, so I have been training with a woman, Lalita, who has a studio in Australia. She's
Mm-hmm.
a licensed Kalaripayat teacher, has been training at the same ashram for years.
Mm-hmm.
And she started training me online, and I've been training in the martial art, but at the same time, you can't really separate yoga from the martial art. All the poses, the fighting stances, the blocks, the
Mm-hmm.
sequences, they're just asanas. They feel so familiar. It's almost like you're just doing, sun salutations, but with slight nuances. So they kind of just gel together really well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the interesting difference with Kalaripayat and yoga is that yoga, you'll notices breath to sort of gradually transition you from one asana to the other.
Mm-hmm.
But Kalaripayat, it uses breath to sort of explosively transition you from one state to the other. So
Mm.
I'm going to give a sort of technical example. If you're doing Warrior One, for
Mm-hmm.
example, you'll inhale and then you'll exhale to go into Warrior Two, where you're kind of lowering your arms down towards the earth. So typically it's inhale to lift up, exhale to ground yourself down towards the earth.
Mm-hmm.
With Kalaripayat, it's the opposite. So typically when you're low on the ground, so you're kind of like in a stance where you're about to jump up and explode and start slicing someone up out of the air or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you exhale explosively to jump off the ground and then exert that force and that momentum. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very interesting because you have to be as connected with the movement in Kalaripayat as you are in yoga,
Mm.
and it's a great brain exercise. So I do integrate the practices now. I do practice yoga kind of singularly at times, but I also will go and practice the Kalaripayat sun salutations to build more heat in the body, or if I want a little bit more of a sweaty workout.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and the thing with Kalaripayat is that it uses sacred geometric forms in all of the
Mm.
fighting sequences. So there is one sun salutation or opening salutation called Vandana Chuvade,
Mm.
um, which is basically a series of sort of these like hand movements, and you're pivoting from your hips, and you end up going in these four perfect directions. It's perfect geometry. So it really shows how this practice, just like yoga, it's indigenous, right? And this is how people would connect to a higher power. They would connect with something that was bigger than them, because as we know, like geometry and math and science, these are all the building blocks of everything that we know in this world. So
Mm-hmm.
it kind of just helps us. It's like a conduit between us and the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
Long answer, sorry.
No, no, this is great. I love one of the things that I noticed when you did the takeover on ABCD Yogi was like, and I think they even posted your morning routine. I think you called it the um,
Dinacharya, yeah.
Dinacharya, and you talk about these geometric poses and like, its physiologic effects, and I feel like that is so important when speaking about yoga. What's kind of your perspective on the state of like let's say just yoga in general, and what are you trying to do to change it? What sort of narrative are you trying to bring to the practice?
So it's so funny. Even just this morning, I was thinking, or last night, I was doing some planning for some upcoming classes that I want to offer to the community, and I was just thinking, like, am I doing the right thing by picking these themes to follow and sort of these like buzzwords that'll get people excited and be like, yeah, click on this video and watch it? Or is there something different I should be doing? Do I need to have a conversation with myself and be like, am I being authentic in my own practice of yoga and in what I then choose to share with other people? Because I
Mm,
don't want to be a proponent of modern yoga. Modern yoga is almost like a completely separate practice from what true yoga is, and I'll get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. But I think with what I want to do with yoga, the vision I have for myself right now, which, as you know, we're always constantly being influenced and evolving. But at this moment, I want to start looking at the 8 limbs of yoga. So there are 8 sort of sectors within the yogic practice that have to do with everything from the physical practices, just like the third or fourth one of them. There's mind-body connection, there's concentration, there's divine sort of connection, and all these different facets and ethical principles by how we interact with ourselves and others. And all of these things are yoga. They're all yoga. And I really want to start exploring taking these concepts that can feel very like out there and philosophical and making them tangible for people. Maybe they just need ideas for how they can integrate it. Like, how do you practice dharana in a day-to-day basis? Dharana is concentration. How do you do that? Like, how do you establish a physical practice that helps you build that concentration ability inside yourself? So that's kind of the idea that I have in mind right now in terms of what I want to do. But in terms of kind of my broader goals within the yoga community, as you can imagine, as you sort of said earlier, increasing representation is something I'm really focused on right now. So I can kind of get into that. I don't know if you wanted to.
Please do.
So I think that advocating for representation in yoga, it's just a pathway to invigorating what is innately an inclusive and unifying practice. In its nature, it is inclusive and it is unifying. And the way that yoga exists today, which is very whitewashed, very material, very curated, and almost distorted, it's so far from what yoga actually is. And it marginalizes the communities that truly need this practice the most, this healing, this unifying, this strengthening practice. There are people who really need it, and they are the people who are the most distant. They have the least access to it.
Yeah.
For comparison, I like to think about Sanatana Dharma versus Hinduism. So a lot of people may not know this. I only learned about this myself a few years ago, this idea of what Sanatana Dharma is. But it's sort of the original spiritual practice that is indigenous to India, and it's a lifestyle. It's a set of rules and practices, right, that people would use to follow and help all humans achieve their dharma or their purpose. And from that, Hinduism is something that kind of exists today. It's what we know in the modern world as a structured religion that is based on Sanatana Dharma, but is morphed into something that is quite divisive in its nature, or it can be, a la things like the caste system, for example, that just perpetuate violence and inequality. And the reason I make that comparison is that modern yoga versus original yoga it's so similar. Yoga is a lifestyle. It's a conduit for all human beings to connect to something bigger than themselves. But the way it exists right now, it feels very exclusive, where if you don't have certain things or if you're not in a certain place, you can't practice it. You shouldn't practice it if it's not perfectly identical to the way they show you in media.
Yeah.
So personally, I think that without diverse representation in yoga, the commodifiers of this practice are hoarding all the benefits, and Black and brown communities are suffering without the tools to heal themselves, and not just heal and survive, but to thrive. Because yoga, as a regular practitioner of yoga, you thrive. If you do it to your best ability, you will thrive. And there are people who don't get access to that, and that's not okay. So I think that representation in yoga is critical because, one, it will reach and appeal to more people, more underrepresented communities, and it will also create generational wealth in these communities. And I'm not talking monetary generational wealth. I'm talking spiritual well-being, generational wealth. Yeah.
That is so well put. That resonates with me so much, especially how something that I should feel, and I feel like in my inner space, I do have this connection to this this practice, but like I just kind of feel really distanced from it just based on the way it is portrayed in media, and I think maybe that's the reason why. Like, you know, I think I remember telling you, like, you know, even here I have this connection that I want to do it, but I really haven't done it as much, just because like I feel out of place in the practice that is portrayed out there. Oh my God, you really hit something there. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
My
Um,
pleasure.
yeah, no, so what are some of the ways that like you think that South Asian Americans have maybe kind of accepted some appropriation or maybe the colonialism that is in yoga, if you can speak on that. And how can we kind of unravel that?
Yeah, that I think about that a lot, and I think it's so hard to think about how we stereotype a practice that we think that we know so much about, or like, oh, we're no, I'm Indian, so I know the real thing. But I'm like, no, that's not true. I grew up believing a lot of those stereotypes. I thought, yoga is only for older people who are super spiritual and
Yes,
religious and this and that, and it's only for like super skinny white women who are fit. Like you must have abs.
yes,
Requirement A, must have
yes.
abs. Like no, that's maybe never gonna happen for me. So I'm like, no, I'm still gonna practice. Abless old me is still gonna do yoga. And I also grew up thinking that yoga was just about stretching and flexibility and breathing, and it's so much more. So, for example, referring back to Kalari, practicing Kalari has given me more mental endurance and stamina than anything else I've ever done. And I've trained for half marathons. I still did not execute like 50% of the mental endurance I need to exercise when I'm practicing Kalari fight and Kalari yoga, for example. And it requires discipline, dedication, resilience, and humility. These are things that you have to integrate into your yoga practice. And it's not, there is a notion that yoga is about relaxing and you have like your singing bowls on in the background and there's like a diffuser in the corner and
Yeah,
dim lighting. And sometimes I'm like, no, I go into the blazing sun and practice out there and like sweat, and I just like to be in the earth and ground because it's a messy practice.
yeah,
You have to shed and break things down to practice, and you have to do it daily. There is a notion that, oh, and I still believe this to some degree, but there is kind of like just do what you feel like, and you can do whenever it occurs to you and things. And I'm like, okay, to some degree I agree with that. Like obviously never push your boundaries if you're not comfortable, if you're in pain, if you're not like emotionally able to, like, because sometimes yoga can be a very emotionally alarming practice. There was a time when I started doing a lot of hip openers and I was sad for no reason. So you got
yeah,
to be sort of like mentally prepared for it. But there
yeah.
is something that is, you benefit the most from what yoga is when you have a rigorous, dedicated practice, and you have to be humble about it. So there's that. And like I mentioned, there's 7 limbs of yoga outside of the physical practice that I had no
Wow.
idea about growing up. So I'm like, oh, yoga is just movement and there's nothing else for me to do. So what do I do if I don't want to move? Do I just like not practice yoga? No, there's 7 other things that you can explore. So um, in order to, yeah, in order to change these stereotypes, I think we have to start with self-knowledge,
Hmm.
which goes in line with humility, and representation, which is, obviously how we start to decolonize this practice. But um, yeah, I mean, there's so many ways that we can get into decolonizing the practice. Like one, shifting our mindset that yoga is a workout. It's not a
Yeah,
workout. It,
yes,
and this is something I want to stress. Yoga is a technology. It is
yes.
it's a psychosomatic, spiritual, and scientific technology. And in the West, every technology is trademarked regardless of if it came from the West or not. It is trademarked ASAP. And especially those that don't belong to it, because they're seen as lucrative commodities. And
Mm,
there is something about the East, which has all these healing practices, and a lot of wisdom was passed down by word of mouth, by storytelling, and there's a reason for that, because it's a way that we would cultivate communities and kinship, versus now when there's an age where it's like the first person to write it down and put a stamp on it is the one who's the winner. And that competitive edge has to be taken away from yoga, and it
hmm.
has to become an egoless practice worldwide, globally. Um, and I think that we can trademark this practice by reclaiming it and by protecting it from devolving any further than it already has. And I think we do that by putting Black and brown faces at the forefront of this
Yeah.
movement. Um, yeah, I have a few more things that I'd love to get into about like actual steps for decolonization, but I want
No,
to
no,
hear your
please,
response
no.
too.
I am like, I mean, just like the people here, like Monica Munchraj over here, she's like, I love this. I'm loving everything you're saying. it's resonating with me. I'm having some breakthroughs right now. Please delve into your steps. I would love to learn more from you.
All right, here we go. So I think in the modern world, decolonizing yoga means first that we have to stop separating spirituality from the practice. There are a lot
Yes.
of people who are like, oh, all you have to do is just show up to your mat and move, and then 60 minutes later you're done. I think we have to stop treating it like a workout and an obligation, and it is spiritual. And spirituality doesn't mean you have to subscribe to any particular religion or this or beliefs. It just means that you are willing to shed your sort of like layers, your perception of yourself, and use that time that you're practicing to go within and start to learn about yourself. That's, to me, is what spirituality is. That's what divinity is. It's just that humility to learn more about yourself.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the first thing. So other ways that the West can stop colonizing yoga is to consider things that, like yoga, which is unifying. It means to yoke or to unify, right? And then there's concepts like puja, which is ritual, and seva, which is service. These are all just different vehicles that, people can use to then achieve dharma or their purpose, or kind of like figure out their purpose in life. And I think that we need to spend a little bit more time integrating some of those ideas and concepts. I'm not saying someone has to go do a puja in the middle of a yoga class, but kind of integrating those ideas, right? So whether that's learning, or we have to just practice true yoga by upholding its real form. So that might be learning and chanting mantras in class, because sound, energy, and vibration is a vital aspect of yoga. It's shifting atoms, and it's shifting the chemistry in our bodies to also help with the benefits. It's not just enough to move your body and place it in different ways. You have to start cultivating this change from the inside. And I think teachers should also be encouraging and demonstrating to their students how to remove ego from the practice, whether that is maybe demoing a modification, or maybe not always having a peak pose. We're sort of trained in yoga teacher training to have a peak pose in every class. So teachers are trained to sequence a whole class leading up to a very cool kind of pose. So say it's like dancer pose, Natarajasana. Everything during the class is like a prep for that pose. It's like almost like everyone is like, their eyes are on that pose and they're not focused on anything else, because they're just like, I just got to make sure that I get to that pose by minute 45 before the cool down starts, so it's like ego immediately starts to become a factor. And I think that's important, to stop making ego such a huge thing. Also, we got to stop using statues and statues of deities as props in class. If someone insists on having them in their studio or in their class, then they are also taking on the responsibility to learning the art of puja and finding a way to incorporate it into their class. Even if they, if they want to go so far as to include a deity, then they should go as far as to respect what it means to have that symbol, that spiritual symbol in your space, and figure out what to do with that. So if you just want a prop, like, get a plant. Like, maybe don't use a spiritual deity. I think that's huge. And also, I think we have to stop complimenting and singling out students in class who have reached the perfect form. If they've done really well and they're in the full expression, we have to stop singling them out and praising them, because that only unnecessarily invites more ego back into the practice and distracts people who might be super in the zone and super in tune with themselves, but maybe they're in a modified version. If they suddenly look at someone who's in full expression, whatever that means, then they might be like, oh, well, what I did was worthless, and all the work that they've done just comes crumbling down.
So what do you feel about, like, you said, like, you like yoga for like, you like getting out there, getting dirty, being really intense in your practice. What do you say to some yoga classes? I forgot the name of the classes that they call it, but it's like, it's just like kind of a glorified stretching class, and it's for relaxation.
Oh, you might be talking about yin yoga, maybe?
Maybe. I think it's also called this, but somebody, the class that I took called it something different. And don't get me wrong, it felt good. Do you think that those classes should be called a yoga class? Because I don't, like.
It's interesting. I No, I don't. Long story short, I don't think they should be called yoga because I don't think that they are really what yoga originally is. I think all these modern yoga is not really yoga. It's uh an evolution of yoga. So I think it's gotten to a point where I think it can be called something else entirely.
Yeah,
Whether they want to call it like mind body movement, or I don't know. I'm not gonna
mind
like try
body
and come up
movement.
with like they can
Yeah.
call it whatever they want, but like I think to call it yoga, like goat yoga,
Oh God.
wine and paint yoga,
Yeah.
like all
No.
these, it blows my mind.
Yeah.
I'm like, why are you calling it yoga? It's not.
Yes. Yeah.
For me, it's like, I don't know. I go back and forth and I'm like, oh, as long as people are getting the benefits, as long as they're like, using it for good, does it really matter? Am I like projecting my ego on it and, trying to like claim ownership over something that like even I'm like, can I really claim ownership over this? Like maybe not. But I think it's about intention. And I think that a goat yoga class will just never have the same intention as a true yoga class. So
Yeah. No, I mean,
yeah.
I don't know about like goat yoga or like this wine paint yoga. I don't even like consider that. But like the I think like this yin yoga type of thing, like where people do find some sort of benefit and whatnot, whereas I feel like I can be like, some mind body movement, relaxation inspired by yogic practices, something like that. If I think I'd be okay with. But I think going back and forth on like, am I projecting my ego? Am I claiming ownership on something? Like I have that internal conflict in me all the time, even as somebody who doesn't regularly practices it. But like, I don't know why I have like a strong like respect and feeling for it. And but that's that's very very insightful. You are so articulate and so you put to words so many things that I've been feeling that like I don't think I was able to put into words, and I think many people here are feeling the same way. That's thank you so much for sharing that. Um, kind of moving away from yoga, you're not just a yogi. Yoga is a big part of you, but one of the things that I've noticed on your channel recently is this new series that you started, the Decolonized Kitchen. I watched your first episode on the Velle Cholam Aval, or the you called it the Irigacholam Aval, is that?
I kind of went back and forth. So that's the second episode in the series. My first one was a beetroot roti and dal, but this one I was doing some research. My mom had given me these things that look like cornflakes, but they're called chola mavel, which she
Mm-hmm.
told me it was like dried corn flakes, like dehydrated corn flakes. But then I did research online, and it's one of those things where it's like the words that are on these packets are so combobulated. Like there's so many meanings for them. So when I looked up chola mavel, I got so many different definitions. I got that it's sorghum flakes. I got it that some people call it rice flakes. Some people are calling it corn flakes. I'm like, which one is it? So I did more research and it looked most similar to sorghum flakes, which is, I believe it's like a millet that's actually native to Africa, not India as I thought. But
Mm,
as you know, there is like so much similarity between sort of East African and South Indian cuisines and foods
yeah.
and nutritional practices. So yeah, Vella Cholam Aval is sort of the Tamil name. I think Irugu Cholam Aval might be the Malayalam
Mm,
version of the name of this. I'm not quite sure, but Vella Cholam Aval is a jaggery and sort of sorghum flake pudding of sorts. It's
mm-hmm,
almost like a halwa.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, sorry, you probably had a question about that specifically.
No, I love this concept of the series called Decolonized Kitchen. I've been, I've been reading articles about, the whitewashing of like recipe books or recipes, and I love that you started doing this. And like, tell us a little bit about, again, like your perspective on what's been happening. What inspired you to do this? Like, tell us, start there.
I think so. I've always loved food. I've loved eating it. I've loved thinking about it and working with it and being creative. And as I got older, I think I started cooking when I was in college. And from there, I just became more and more passionate about it and learning about ingredients. And also on my own sort of health journey, I started thinking about just shifting the way that I eat, the behaviors I have around food. And as you know, globally, we now look at food for convenience and for speed and efficiency. So, fast food as a concept has like completely taken over our food prepping sort of practices. And if you look back at the way our ancestors cooked, it was as slow as it gets. Like if you want idlis, if you're craving idlis, you better start preparing like a day and a half before. You start
Mm,
thinking about it a long time before. You get the ingredients, you're soaking them, then you got to grind them, and then you got to let them ferment overnight, and then you make
mm,
them the next day. So it's slow, it's intentional, and it's a
mm,
process that shows so much respect and care for the
mm,
ingredients that our land gives us, that the land produces
mm,
for us. So it's a cyclical process that it's all about nourishment. So if you look at the concept of, or the Ayurvedic practice in our culture, it's, they say digestion starts from the moment you look at your food, from the eyes,
mm,
right? From the onset of this connection with your food. So similarly, I think when you start with the care that you put into your food, you know, people always say food tastes better when you cook with love. I think that's so true. That's exactly what this is. When you put the intention and care into your food and you nurture the food, it becomes that much more nourishing for your body. So I try to eat by Ayurvedic principles whenever possible. And I think that delving into that world and that type of eating is what inspired me to think about my own kitchen and how colonized it was. So I started looking at the foods that I stocked regularly, the places
mm,
that I was buying from, the methods that I used to cook. Am I using a pan? Am I using a microwave? You know, what am I using my fridge for? And the more I started being critical of just things that I took for granted, the way that I cook on a day-to-day basis, the more I realized how distanced I was from the way that my ancestors cooked. And
yeah,
I think if you zoom out and look at the big picture, a lot of health problems have come out of the fast food or the modern
yes,
food movement. I think
mm-hmm,
people were a lot healthier when they were in balance, when they practiced yoga regularly, when they lived in communities, when they cooked a certain way. Their bodies were just naturally in sync with the way that humans work, the way that the earth works. It was great. And then as soon as we started moving to a more consumeristic, colonized society, it's like everything just started going downhill from there. Everything became about excess. You love this one thing because it's so cheap and it's so fast. You eat
yeah,
so much of it, and then you start having these issues, and then those problems can start filtering down to the generations of people that come after you, and it becomes
mm,
harder and harder to solve these problems without starting to involve things like surgery and medication and things that, you know, no one really kind of is like, sign me up.
yeah,
So
yeah,
long story short, like that was kind of the inspiration for why I wanted to start creating the series that I'm starting with what I know, South Indian cooking. I've been learning to cook some of my favorite foods for a few years now. And I used to just post a lot of stuff on my stories. And, you know, as my community grew, people were like, I really love seeing this. I love watching you cook or hearing your commentary about it or learning, you know, the stories that you share with us about the food. And I thought, why not just make this a staple, something that I can offer to the community, both in terms of like sharing the knowledge, maybe helping our communities of people who, you know, similar Indian Americans who grew up, you know, displaced out of India and are starting to want to connect with their culture. You know, here's maybe an
yes,
accessible way for you to get that information while you're scrolling. Maybe you see this and you're like, oh, I didn't know I could do that with cumin seeds, and try it out. But at the same time, I want to start unifying all these different underrepresented communities. And I have plans in the coming months to start collaborating with some people that some of my friends from different cultures who I want to start involving, and I want to start
yeah.
learning from them. And I'm really excited to keep expanding this so that it's more inclusive and we continue to tear down these stereotypes.
I love that. I can't wait to see what your this venture brings for you. And um, you know, many of the concepts we've been talking about are they're pretty heavy in introspection. There's a lot of um, thought patterns that we need to like sort of check in with and sort of like unpack and unravel, you know. And I'm sure, like, you know, you've kind of indicated that you've had that similar sort of introspective practices where you're like, oh, am I right? Like, am I doing things the right way? What is right? What is wrong? Like, how do you navigate something like this? How do we like, what are some ways that work for you to sort of introspect and sort of say like, okay, I need to maybe think about this in a different way, even though it may be uncomfortable? Sorry, that's a heavy question.
It's a great question, and I do think about that all the time. And I feel like the chief rule that I try to live by is if you lead with genuinity and good intentions, I think that even if the pathway can be rocky and you might have a couple of turns and not be sure if you're doing the right thing all the time, I think if you always just use your intention as your North Star, you can't really go wrong.
Hmm.
And I think that's where a lot of people may have strayed. So people who started popularizing yoga in the West, I don't think that their intentions were always good because I think it was commodification and marketing that was motivating them
Mm,
and not awareness, not spreading wellness. I don't think those were the true intentions of the industry. So I
yeah,
think that's why we got from where we were to where we are now. And it's not too late. I think that people are sort of collectively waking up and saying, hold on, I don't think this is how it's supposed to be used. I think we need to start like being critical of ourselves and critical of others and always just, leading with love. Even when we're being critical, we can still do that with love and with care.
yeah,
Um, so I think those are sort of my leading principles is to be intentional and know that that you will make mistakes along the way and that you might say something that 2 years from now you'll look back and be like, I no longer feel that way. And that's okay as long as you're open to learning and you're constantly trying to learn.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
You have, I mean, I have so many thoughts right now. I'm sorry if I'm like kind of a little scatterbrained because I'm like listening to what you're saying, and then like I just have been having so many, you put into words so many things that I've had feelings about, and so I'm really grateful for this conversation. Thank you. Um, Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but there's one last thing I want to talk to you about is your plant collection. I love your plant collection. I've recently gotten into the to plants. I never thought I'd be a plant guy. I think quarantine has kind of started me with like some mint and basil, but like I just like what kind of plants do you have? How many do you have and how long have you had them?
So I got my first plant 4 years ago when I moved, or 4 or 5 years ago, and I moved into my first sort of solo apartment. It was
Hmm.
a cutting from a plant that my mom had. My mom is the OG plant queen.
Yeah.
Her garden is next level. I mean, that's where my love for sort of plants and appreciation for nature kind of started with her is
Yeah.
she, for the last 15 years, she's been growing this paradise of a garden.
Yeah.
I'm actually visiting my family right now, so I don't have all my normal plant babies around me, but
Mm.
she has cultivated this garden that is just so stunning. And that is the best example I can ever give someone that because she's okay. So even going back to the concept that you were just talking about, like how do you know if something is right or if you're going to make a mistake, and like what's your rule? How do you know what to do? That my mom's garden is a perfect example. So she didn't have a plan. She planned the whole garden over the course of 15 years, and she had so many setbacks, so many left turns and right turns, and didn't know how to go about it because she wasn't using outside help. She wanted to do it herself. And she learned about everything from composting to grafting to how to cultivate bulbs and things like that. And she certainly made a lot of not mistakes, but like took a lot of like missteps along the way. And still now her garden, it looks like something that you would see in like some like Da Vinci's depiction of heavens or something like that. It's crazy how beautiful it is. And it's because she led with love and intention. So that instilled in me this like just love for nature and wanting to be surrounded by earthly elements whenever possible. And because I live in a very urbanized area, it's sort of close to a downtown part of the city. I wanted to invite that in. So my mom gave me a cutting from her garden, and that started off my very first plant baby. And that plant just took off. I barely paid attention to it at first, and it just kind of took off. I don't actually know what the name of most of my plants is, except for two. So I have a croton, which I bought last year, and she is thriving. She's
Hmm.
beautiful. So she is the plant that sort of has like each leaf is sort of a different color. So it's like one has like yellow sort of
Hmm.
lines on it. One is a more red leaf with yellow lines on it. So
Hmm.
that's sorry, not a croton, a proton? No, croton. Her name is
Hmm.
Proton. She is a croton.
Uh-huh.
I also have I think it's called a Schiflera plant. So it
Hmm.
kind of, they have like really long skinny branches and then these sort of like a bunch of leaves that come out in sort of like a star shape at the end of each
Mm.
branch. So I think it's called a Schefflera. And then I have a Monstera, also known as a Swiss cheese plant. I've had
Hmm.
that for about 2.5 years now, and I think I do need to give her a little bit more attention. Her name is Tara, and I do need to repot her. But
Mm.
I love Monsteras. They're just like the play with negative space, how you see those like gaps in the
Yeah.
leaf. It's pretty gorgeous. And what else do I have? I also have a fern. So
Hmm.
funny story there. I actually named her after myself. Her name is Divya. And the
Uh-huh.
reason being is she is very difficult to take care of, and I often find myself neglecting her just because I'm
Mm.
like, oh, it's too stressful to think
Wow.
about how to like take care of her. So I thought if I name her after myself, I'll be more inclined to like be compassionate towards her and be like, oh, I have to like I can't let Divya wilt. Like I have to water her. I have to like help her thrive. So
I
that's a
love that.
trick.
I love that. Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, no, my plant babies, they're kind of few in number, but like I feel like I'm going to the nursery like almost every other day. Even actually right before this, my mom and I just got back from the nursery. She's visiting me in Augusta. Not a huge fan of this city, but my favorite place in the city is my nursery here. And I just picked up a Chinese money plant, which
Oh.
are have these beautiful leaves. But so far, I've named my kids Freddie, Pepper, Phil, and then my fiance Jani has Phil's cousin or a sister Lil. And yeah, so I'm just they're bringing me so much joy, and I did not know that plants would I would ever be a plant guy. And I have a
Is
lime
that
tree outside.
is that Lil and Phil as in the Rugrats, the twins from Rugrats?
Yeah, it started off because the name of the plant is a philodendron, and so I was like, oh, I'll just call him Phil. And then like they're pretty hardy, and like my fiance is getting into I guess growing plants or gardening, if you will. And so I got her a matching philodendron, and hers is Lillian. And she also has an avocado tree called she named her Amelia after Amelia Earhart. I don't know why, but that brings her happiness. And yeah, and then she has a succulent too, and I forgot the name. But yeah, no, I'm thoroughly enjoying this, and I see your posts, and they're always very lush and green, and they just bring me so much joy. And like, so I just definitely had to talk about that. Well, thank you so much. I've learned so much, and I feel like there's more I can learn from you, and I can't wait to like see what more you do with your yoga videos. I know you uploaded a new one on YouTube. I
Mhm.
can't wait to see that and like Decolonize Kitchen. Where can people follow you and plug yourself? Like, tell us more about what we can expect from you and where.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, my Instagram is my name. It's at Divya Bala. So that's definitely a great place to stay in touch if you want to keep up with things that I'm doing in art activism, in yoga, in cooking. And I don't know, sometimes I just like share random stuff too. So that's a good place to
Yeah.
just stay connected. I do have a YouTube channel. Also, just if you type in Divya Bala, that should pull me up. And on that channel, I post a lot of different types of content. So sometimes it is more vlog style content, like lifestyle things. And sometimes I do post yoga classes on there and travel videos, back when travel was a thing. So that's a great place to stay connected. And yeah, I definitely expect more stuff in terms of cooking and education around the roots of certain dishes and things like that in
Yes.
coming months. I'm super excited about this project in particular, and would love to connect with people from your community as well to hear about their experiences and
Yeah.
go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to have you back actually, and just kind of do like a little spotlight on specifically on cooking. If we can just dedicate more time into that, because I know
Yes.
I'm passionate about food, and I always talk about my tatama, my great grandmother cooking, and like her practices being so different than the way they are now, and the way it tasted, the way it made me feel was so different. But So I have feelings about that too, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that too. So I'd love to have you back. Thank you so much once again. And yeah, but I will connect with you soon. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for another amazing episode of Masalainurdosa Presents. Everybody go follow Divya Balakrishnan at Divya Bala. And in her bio is a link to her YouTube channel and a link to her newest 20-minute yoga video. And you can check her Instagram out for her series, The Decolonized Kitchen. That's posted on her Instagram as well. But thank you again, Divya. And thank you, everybody. I'll see you guys next week. I will post next week's guests on shortly. And yeah, thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.